240, requesting assistance. We have a possible 211 in progress.
I'd been a park ranger for 9 years, stationed in Blackthorn National Forest, a sprawling maze of towering pines, jagged ravines, and trails that twist deeper than most folks dare to go. My job was part trail guide, part wilderness babysitter, keeping hikers from getting lost, making sure campfires didn't turn into infernos, and occasionally rescuing someone who thought they could outsmart a bear. I'd seen my share of oddities, hikers swearing they heard voices in the fog, strange carvings on trees that didn't match any animal's claws, even a guy who tried to ride a moose because he thought it'd make a viral video. But there's one night, 3 years ago, that still lingers in my mind like a shadow that won't fade. It's the kind of memory that creeps up when I'm alone on a trail, making me glance over my shoulder at shapes that shouldn't be there. I'm going to take you through it, step by step, because I think you'll feel what I felt. Mix of fear, duty, and a nagging sense that the world isn't quite what we think it is. Have you ever been somewhere that felt like it was watching you, like the ground itself didn't want you there? That's where this story starts, deep in the heart of Blackthorn. I was wrapping up a long shift at the ranger station, a creaky wooden cabin that smelled of cedar, coffee, and a hint of mildew from the damp forest air. The walls were plastered with faded maps, some so old the trails they showed didn't exist anymore, and a wood stove in the corner crackled softly, fighting off the chill. It was around 9 p.m., and I was ready to head home. My thermos empty and my boots caked with mud from a day spent checking the upper trails. The forest was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that makes your ears strain for any sound at all. I was locking the door, my keys jingling in the silence, when my radio crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice cut through, calm but with an edge that made my stomach tighten, like she was trying to keep it together. A hiker had called from a remote trailhead, deep in Raven's Hollow, about 10 miles into the backcountry. Her name was Emily, and she was alone, her voice trembling as she reported strange noises low.
Superintendent, the board members, and the idiot. Well, here comes one form.
Hello?
Yes, we're at the Nelson Building, and there's some man here with the dog who came into the board meeting.
Okay, you're at the...
Rumbling hums that didn't sound like any Animaland lights flickering in the trees. Soft and pulsing, not like a flashlight or campfire. She'd been camping with a friend, Jake, but they'd split up to gather firewood, and now he was gone. The call dropped before she could say more, and attempts to reach her got nothing but static. My job was to check it out, make sure she was safe, and find Jake if I could. I grabbed my gear flashlight, first aid kit, a flare gun for emergencies, and a pocket knife I'd carried since my first day on the job, and climbed into the park's Jeep. The engine's rumble, the only sound in the night. The road to Raven's Hollow was a narrow, gravelly path that twisted through the forest like a snake. During the day, it's a beautiful drive, with sunlight filtering through the pines, casting dappled shadows on the ground, and the occasional deer darting across. At night, it's a different story. The trees lean in close, their branches scraping the Jeep's sides like fingers on a chalkboard, and the darkness feels like it's pressing against the windows. My headlights carved a tunnel through the night, catching swirls of mist that curled around the trunks like smoke. I'd driven this route 100 times, but something felt off that night. The air seemed heavier, like it was carrying a weight I couldn't see. And the usual night sounds, crickets chirping, owls hooting, the rustle of leaves were gone. It was like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the late hour, the cold, or maybe too much coffee making me jumpy. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. About halfway to the trailhead, my headlights caught something that made me ease off the gas, a strip of red fabric. Maybe a bandana dangling from a low pine branch about 7 feet off the ground. I slowed the Jeep, the gravel crunching under my tires, and got out to take a closer look. The fabric was tied tightly, not snagged, and it was clean, no dirt or fraying, like it had been placed there hours ago. I shone my flashlight on it, the beam shaking just a bit in my hand. It could have been a hiker's marker, but something about it felt deliberate, like a sign meant for someone or something else. I tucked it into my pocket, figuring I'd ask Emily about it, and got back in the Jeep, my eyes scanning the trees for anything else out of place. Have you ever found something in the wild that didn't feel right, like it was left there for a reason you couldn't figure out? A mile later, I saw something that made me hit the brakes hard. My headlights picked up scratches on a cluster of pines deep, jagged gouges in the bark, running vertically as high as 9 feet. I'd seen bear marks before, usually low and messy, where they'd clawed for sap or marked their territory. These were different, wider, deeper, almost like someone had taken a chisel to the wood with precision. I got out, my flashlight casting long shadows, and leaned in close. The scratches were fresh, the wood still damp where it had been torn away. And there was a smell, earthy, musky, like wet fur mixed with something sharp and metallic, almost like blood. It wasn't the usual forest scent, pine and damp earth, and it made my skin prickle. I ran my fingers along the gouges, feeling the rough edges, and noticed they weren't random. They formed a pattern, almost like a tally. 5 marks in a row, then a gap, then 5 more. I told myself it was probably a bear, maybe a big one, but my gut wasn't buying it. I climbed back into the Jeep and kept driving, the trailhead now just a mile away. The forest seemed to close in tighter, the darkness thicker, like it was trying to push me back. I've been in plenty of wild places, from deserts to mountains, but Raven's Hollow felt different that night, like I was crossing a line I hadn't seen. It's the kind of feeling that makes you wonder if you're the intruder, not the other way around. When I reached the trailhead, I found Emily's campsite in a small clearing, marked by a smoldering fire pit and a single tent flapping in the breeze. The fire was nearly out, just a few embers glowing red in the ash, but the site was a mess. The tent's poles were bent, one corner ripped open like something had clawed through it with surgical precision. A backpack lay nearby, its contents granola bars, a water bottle. A rolled-up jacket scattered across the ground like someone had torn through it in a hurry. I called out, my voice loud in the silence, announcing myself as a ranger. Nothing answered, just the faint rustle of leaves, though there was no wind to move them. I swept the clearing with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark. And that's when I saw the track's massive footprints pressed deep into the soft earth near the tent. They were at least 15 inches long, wider than my boots, with a shape that was almost human but not quite too broad, with toes that seemed too long and too evenly spaced. The weight behind them must have been enormous, judging by how deep they sank into the mud. Deeper than my own tracks, even though I was carrying a heavy pack. They led from the tent toward the tree line, disappearing into the underbrush. My heart started to pound, a steady thump in my chest, but I pushed it down. My job was to find Emily, not chase shadows. I called out again, louder, my voice echoing into the trees, and thought I heard a faint sound, a sob, maybe, coming from deeper in the woods. It was faint, but it was enough to keep me moving. I followed the tracks, my flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness, each step feeling heavier than the last. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No owls, no frogs, just the crunch of my boots on pine needles and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The tracks led to a narrow trail, one of the less traveled paths that winds through Raven's Hollow, a place even seasoned hikers avoid because of its steep drops and dense undergrowth. As I walked, I noticed more signs, broken branches. Some snapped clean at heights I couldn't reach, even on my tiptoes, and more of those deep scratches on trees. They weren't random. They followed the trail, like markers guiding someone or something deeper into the hollow. The musky smell was back, stronger now, clinging to the air like a warning. It wasn't just wet fur anymore. It had a sour edge, like something alive and angry had passed through. About a quarter-mile in, I reached a small stream, its banks muddy and churned up. More footprints, some overlapping, as if whatever made them had crossed the stream multiple times, pacing back and forth. But what stopped me cold was a single handprint pressed into the mud, a handprint bigger than my head, with fingers that looked like they could wrap around my arm twice. It was deliberate, like someone had leaned down to steady themselves, and the sight of it made my breath catch. I crouched to get a better look, my flashlight shaking in my hand, the beam jittering across the mud. The print was deep, the fingers splayed wide, and there was a faint smear of something dark mud, maybe, or something else. Have you ever seen something that made your brain scream, "This doesn't belong"? That handprint did that to me, like a piece of a puzzle from a world I didn't know existed. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and kept moving, following the trail deeper into the hollow. The path narrowed, the trees pressing closer, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the stars. The air was colder here, damp with the scent of moss and decay, and the silence was heavier, like the forest was waiting for me to make a mistake. My radio crackled, but when I tried to call in, I got nothing but static, a low hiss that seemed to mock me. Cell service was a lost cause this far out, the mountains and trees blocking any signal, so I was on my own. The sobbing sound came again, clearer now, from a rocky outcrop just ahead, where the trail dipped into a small gully. I climbed up, my boots slipping on the damp stones, the flashlight beam bouncing as I moved. There she was, Simile curled up behind a boulder, her knees pulled to her chest, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She was clutching a flashlight, its beam flickering weakly, like it was on its last legs. Her hair was tangled, her jacket torn at the sleeve, and her eyes were wide, darting toward the trees like she expected something to come charging out. I knelt beside her, keeping my voice low and steady, the way you talk to a scared animal. "Hey, I'm with the Park Service," I said. "You're Emily, right? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her hands were trembling, and she whispered that something was out there, something big, watching her from the shadows. She'd seen it near the campsite, tall and upright, with eyes that glowed amber when her flashlight hit them. Her friend, Jake, had gone to investigate a noise, and he hadn't come back. She'd hidden here after the tent was torn open, too scared to move until I showed up. I helped her to her feet, my arms steadying her as she swayed, and promised we'd find Jake. But inside, my mind was racing, trying to piece together the tracks, the handprint, and her story. What could do this? A bear, a cougar? Nothing fit, and the way she looked at me, like I was her only hope, made my chest tighten. I gave Emily my spare jacket, wrapping it around her shoulders, and asked her to tell me everything while we started back toward the campsite. She clung to my arm, her steps unsteady, jumping at every snap of a twig or rustle in the bushes. I kept my flashlight moving, sweeping the trail ahead, trying to keep her talking to calm her down. She said they'd been camping for 2 days, a weekend getaway to unplug from their city jobs. They'd chosen Raven's Hollow because it was remote, a place to escape the noise of phones and emails. The first night, they'd heard strange noises, low rumbles, like distant thunder. But the sky was clear, studded with stars. They'd laughed it off, blaming the wind or maybe a bear rummaging in the distance. Jake had even joked about Bigfoot, doing a goofy impression of a lumbering monster, which made them both laugh until their sides hurt. But tonight, the noises got closer, louder, like something heavy moving through the underbrush. Then the lights started soft, pulsing glows in the trees, not like any flashlight or lantern. They were faint, almost like fireflies, but bigger, drifting between the pines in a way that felt wrong. Jake, always the curious one, had gone to check it out, thinking it was another camper playing a prank. He'd grabbed his knife and a headlamp, telling Emily to stay put. That's when she'd heard the tent rip, a sharp, tearing sound, and saw the shell broader than any person, moving on 2 legs with a grace that didn't match its size. She'd grabbed her phone, called 911, and ran for cover when the line went dead. As she talked, her voice broke, and she kept glancing back, like she could still see that shadow in her mind. I asked if she'd seen anything else, anything about the lights or the figure. She hesitated, then whispered that it had looked at her, its eyes locking onto hers through the tent's mesh window before it turned away. Have you ever felt like something saw you, really saw you, in a way that made your skin crawl? That's what I saw in Emily's eyes. A fear that went deeper than words. We reached the campsite, and I checked the tent again, hoping for clues about Jake. The damage was worse. Up-close claw marks slashed through the nylon. Too clean for a bear, too deep for a person with a knife. The tears were precise, like something had cut through with a single swipe, and the poles were bent at angles that suggested incredible force. I found Jake's backpack, a water bottle, and his torn jacket, but no blood, no signs of a struggle, just chaos. Emily was shaking, her breath coming in short gasps, saying we needed to leave, that whatever was out there wasn't gone. I couldn't argue with her fear, but I couldn't abandon Jake without at least trying to find him. I told her to stay close to the Jeep, parked just a few yards away, and handed her the flare gun, showing her how to aim and fire if something happened. Her hands shook as she took it, her eyes pleading with me not to go, but I promised I'd be quick. I followed the tracks again, this time leading away from the campsite toward a dense thicket where the trees grew so close their branches tangled like a net. The air felt heavier here, thick with that musky smell, now mixed with a faint metallic tense that made my stomach turn. I heard a sound, a low, guttural hum, not quite an animal growl, coming from multiple directions. It wasn't just one source. It was like a chorus, rising and falling, echoing through the trees like a conversation I couldn't understand. I froze, my flashlight sweeping the darkness, and that's when I saw it a shape. Just beyond the beam, moving between the pines. It was tall, at least 8 feet, upright like a person, but covered in dark, shaggy hair that seemed to swallow the light. Its eyes caught my flashlight, reflecting a dull amber glow. And for a moment, it just stood there, watching me. I've faced down bears before, even a mountain lion once. and they all move with a kind of instinct freeze or flee when a human shows up. This thing didn't. It tilted its head like it was sizing me up, and I swear I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Its shoulders were broad, broader than any linebacker I'd ever seen, and its arms were long, hanging past what should have been its knees, with hands that looked like they could crush stone. Its face was shadowed, but there was something almost human about it, too human, like a face carved from ancient rock, weathered but alive with intent. I called out, identifying myself as a ranger, my voice steady but loud, hoping to scare it off. "Hey, back off. I'm with the Park Service." It didn't move, just kept staring, its eyes locked on mine, unblinking. I took a step back, my hand resting on the flare gun at my hip, and shouted again, louder this time. This time, it moved not away, but toward me, slow and deliberate, each step crunching the forest floor with a weight that vibrated through my boots. The humming sound grew louder, joined by others, closer now, like a pack coordinating in the dark. My heart was hammering, but I held my ground, years of training kicking in. I didn't want to hurt it, whatever it was, but I had Emily to protect and Jake to find. I couldn't let it get closer without knowing what it wanted. It stopped about 20 yards away, near an old fallen log, and bent down. I thought it was crouching to hide, but then I saw it pick something up, a rusted metal bucket, probably left by some long-gone camper, half buried in the dirt. It held the bucket in one hand, its fingers wrapping around it like it was a child's toy, and raised it overhead with no effort at all. Not like an animal swiping out of instinct, but like it knew what it was doing. Like it was showing me it could crush me if it wanted to. My mind raced. Bears don't use tools. Cougars don't carry buckets. This was something else, something that understood power and threat. I shouted one last time, my voice cracking just a little, telling it to back off. "Stay where you are. Don't come closer." It didn't listen. It took another step, and I saw its eyes again, sharp, calculating, not like any animal I'd ever seen. They weren't just reflecting light. They were studying me like they were weighing my next move. In that moment, I made a choice. I pulled the flare gun from my hip, aimed high, and fired. The bright red streak arced through the air, bursting into a blinding glow that lit up the clearing like a miniature sun. The creature flinched, dropping the bucket with a clang that echoed like a gunshot. It staggered back, shielding its eyes with one massive arm, and let out a sound, a deep, rumbling wail that felt like it shook the ground beneath me. It wasn't just pain. It was anger, maybe even surprise, like it hadn't expected me to fight back. The sound hit me like a wave, vibrating in my chest, primal and raw, like nothing I'd ever heard. The creature turned and crashed into the trees, branches snapping as it moved, not like a wounded animal, but with purpose, like it was choosing to leave, but it wasn't alone. I heard more movement, more of those rumbling vocalizations coming from all around my left, right, deeper in the woods. There were others out there, hidden in the dark, and they'd heard the flare, heard their companions cry. The sounds faded as they retreated, but I didn't feel relieved. I felt watched, like the forest itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. My hands were shaking as I lowered the flare gun, the smell of burnt powder mixing with that musky odor. I ran back to the jeep, my boots pounding the trail, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Emily was waiting, her face pale, clutching the flare gun I'd given her like it was a lifeline. She'd heard the wail, seen the flares glow light up the sky, and she was ready to bolt. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer, not one that made sense. I got her into the Jeep, started the engine, and drove back toward the ranger station, my eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. The road felt longer going back, the darkness thicker, like the forest was reluctant to let us go. My radio crackled back to life halfway to the station, the static gone as if something had been blocking it before. I called in for backup, reporting a possible animal attack and a missing hiker. I kept it vague: massive tracks, a torn tent. Jake Gonby, 'cause how do you explain something you don't understand? Have you ever had to report something you knew no one would believe, but you had to say it anyway? At the station, I got Emily settled with a blanket and a mug of hot tea, her hands still trembling as she clutched it. The station was warm, the wood stove casting a soft glow, but it didn't touch the chill in my bones. Emily sat in silence at first, staring at the floor, then started talking again, like she needed to get it out. She told me more about Jake. He was the kind of guy who'd climb a tree just to see how high he could go, always chasing a thrill. They'd been friends since college, and this trip was his idea. A chance to get back to nature, he'd said with a grin. She described the lights again, how they pulsed in the trees. Not random, but moving in patterns, like they were circling the campsite. She'd thought they were lanterns at first, maybe other campers, but they were too soft, too fluid, like they were alive. When Jake didn't come back, she'd peeked out of the tent and seen the figure tall, broad, moving with a purpose that scared her more than any animal could. It had looked right at her, its eyes glowing in the dark, and she'd frozen, unable to move until it turned away. She kept asking if we'd find Jake, if he was okay, and I didn't have the heart to tell her I didn't know. I promised we'd keep looking, that we'd bring in every ranger we had. But deep down, I wasn't sure what we'd find or if we'd find anything at all. By dawn, we had a search party, organized rangers, local volunteers, and a couple of sheriff's deputies who knew the backcountry. We started at the campsite, fanning out through Raven's Hollow, following the tracks I'd seen. They were still clear in the morning light, massive and deep, leading from the tent to the thicket where I'd seen the creature. We found more signs: broken branches, some snapped at heights no human could reach, and more of those deep scratches on trees, forming those strange tally-like patterns. Near the stream, we found another handprint, identical to the one I'd seen, pressed into the mud with that same deliberate precision. One of the volunteers, an older guy named Amos, who'd hunted in Blackthorn for decades, stopped dead when he saw it. He didn't say much, just shook his head and muttered something about old stories. We kept going, calling Jake's name, our voices echoing through the hollow. We found a pile of rocks, each one the size of a bowling ball, stacked in a perfect circle near the rocky outcrop where I'd found Emily. It wasn't natural stones, don't arrange themselves like that. And the ground around it was undisturbed, no footprints or drag marks. The deputies took photos, and one of the rangers, a woman named Sarah who'd been with me on tough searches before, pulled me aside. "This isn't a bear, is it?" she whispered, her eyes fixed on the stones. I shook my head, not trusting myself to say more. We searched until dusk, combing every trail, every gully, but found no sign of Jake's, no clothes, no gear, no blood. It was like he'd vanished into the forest itself. The official report called it a bear attack, the easiest explanation for the torn tent and scattered gear. The tracks were unusual but likely animal, the handprints possibly distorted by weather. But the rangers who'd been out there with me, who'd seen the evidence up close, knew it wasn't that simple. Sarah, especially, kept asking me what I'd seen, her voice low so the others wouldn't hear. I told her about the figure, the bucket, the eyes, and she just nodded, like she'd half expected it. Over the next few weeks, I was put on light duty, answering phones and filing reports while the higher-ups reviewed the incident. They asked a lot of questions. Had I been drinking? Was I overtired? Did I misjudge a bear in the dark? I stuck to the facts, the tracks, the handprints, the way that thing moved with purpose. They didn't push too hard, but I could tell they didn't know what to make of it. The park superintendent, a nonsense guy named Tom, called me into his office one day. He'd read my report, seen the photos, and he didn't laugh or call me crazy. "You did what you had to do," he said, but his eyes said he was as unsettled as I was. He told me to keep it quiet, not to stir up rumors that could scare off tourists. Blackthorn was a big draw for hikers, and the last thing the park needed was a story about monsters in the woods. But the forest didn't stay quiet. In the months that followed, hikers started reporting strange things, footprints too big for a person, some measuring 16 inches long, with a stride that suggested something taller than any human. Trees were found snapped at heights no bear could reach, their trunks twisted like something had grabbed them and pulled until they broke. A local farmer found 3 of his goats dead, their necks broken clean, no bite marks or blood, just left in a field like a message. Another ranger, a rookie named Mike, found a circle of stones like the one we'd seen, this time with a single, feather black, glossy, bigger than any bird's placed in the center. The incidents all happened within a 10-mile radius of Raven's Hollow, like whatever was out there had claimed that patch of forest as its own. I started talking to locals, quietly, off the record, trying to piece together what was happening. Amos, the old hunter, invited me to his cabin one evening, a small place cluttered with hunting gear and old photos. Over a glass of whiskey, he told me stories his grandfather used to share, tales of the keepers, tall shadows that moved through the woods, watching but rarely interfering. They'd been here long before the park, he said, guarding something hidden in the hollows, maybe a place, maybe a secret. He'd seen them once as a kid, 2 figures standing at the edge of a clearing, their eyes glowing in the moonlight. He'd never told anyone, not wanting to be called crazy. But after what I'd seen, he figured I'd understand. I also talked to Clara, who ran the diner near the park entrance, a place where rangers and locals swapped stories over greasy burgers and strong coffee. She'd lived in Blackthorn her whole life and had her own tails lights in the trees on moonless nights, soft and pulsing, just like Emily described. Her grandmother used to leave offerings at the edge of the woods, bread, apples, small carvings of animals to keep the keepers at peace. Clara still did it sometimes, out of habit, though she laughed it off as superstition. But she'd seen things, too, a shadow moving across her backyard one night, too tall to be a person, and a low hum that woke her dog, who wouldn't stop barking until dawn. She showed me a photo on her phone, blurry but chilling, a tree near her house with scratches like the ones I'd seen, high and deep, forming that same tally-like pattern. The more I heard, the more I realized Raven's Hollow wasn't just a place, it was a boundary, a line between our world and something older, something we weren't meant to understand. Have you ever heard stories like that, passed down in your family or town, about things that live just out of sight? If you have, you know how they stick with you, making you wonder what's true. That night changed me in ways I'm still unraveling. I used to think the forest was just trees and animals, a place I could map and master with enough time. Now, I see it differently. Every trail I walk, every shadow I pass, feels alive in a way I can't explain. I still patrol Blackthorn, still guide hikers, but I'm more careful now. More aware of the sounds that don't belong, the shapes that linger just beyond my flashlight's beam. I think about Jake every day, wondering if he's out there somewhere, lost or worse. Did he see something he wasn't supposed to? Did he cross a line, like I did, and pay a price I didn't? Emily moved back to the city, last I heard, and hasn't set foot in a forest since. I can't blame her. I think about that creature, too. The way it looked at me, like it knew me, like it was deciding what I was worth. Those eyes weren't just animal. They were sharp, intelligent, like they carried stories of their own. I wonder if I made the right call, firing that flare. Maybe if I'd waited, watched a little longer, I could have understood what it wanted. Maybe it wasn't trying to hurt us, just protect something, its home, its family, its secrets. But in that moment, with Emily scared out of her mind and Jake missing, I did what I thought was right. I protected the person in front of me, even if it meant facing something I couldn't explain. Sometimes I go back to Raven's Hollow, not on official patrols, but on my own, when the park is quiet. I walk the trails, look for those tracks, those scratches, hoping for answers. I've never seen the creature again, but I've felt it tore something like it watching from the trees. Last month, I found another circle of stones, this one with a small bone in the center, polished and clean, like an offering. I don't know what it means, but I left it there, untouched. Amos says the keepers don't like to be disturbed, that they've been here longer than us, and will be here long after. Clara says to keep leaving offerings, to show respect. I'm not sure what I believe, but I know Blackthorn isn't just a forest anymore. It's a place where the rules don't always apply, where the line between what's real and what's not blurs in the dark. Have you ever had an experience like that? Something that made you question what you know about the world? Maybe it was a sound in the woods, a shadow that moved when it shouldn't, or a story from someone you trust. Drop it in the comment side. Love to hear what you've seen or heard. And if you want more stories from Blackthorn, from the edges of the unknown, stick around. This forest has plenty more to tell, and I'm still listening, still trying to understand what's out there, waiting in the shadows.